There is a darkness within Tyrion Lannister. Throughout A Dance with Dragons, we see it grow as he attempts to reckon with what he has done at the end of the previous book, the murders of his lover Shay and his father Tywin Lannister. That darkness initially almost overwhelms him entirely, causing him to lose the will to live for much of the early part of this book. But by its end, we see Tyrion resolve to live and inflict this darkness on all of Essos and Westeros. Martin has described Tyrion as a villain, despite the little Lannister being one of his favorite characters to write. Today, I want to examine what exactly Tyrion Lannister's villainous role in the Winds of Winter might entail, as I believe that role has already begun, as it is a pattern of Tyrion corrupting the three heads of the dragon. A phrase repeats throughout Targaryen history. The dragon has three heads. This obviously refers to their sigil, as far as we are aware. There are no literal three headed dragons in the history of Ice and Fire, but many people also think that it is tied to a number of prophecies. We see the prophecy obsessed Rhaegar Targaryen reference this in a vision that Daenerys has, and there are many theories about who might be the various heads of the dragons in terms of a grand mystical role in the narrative. But as we currently have the series, there are three heads to the dragon. There are three Targaryens who are all very likely to play very important roles in the future of the series. Those being, of course, Daenerys Targaryen, the most obvious of these three candidates, Aegon Targaryen, also called Young Griff, to whom we are introduced in A Dance with Dragons, and with whom Tyrion becomes acquainted. We will get to that interaction in a moment here. And additionally, Jon Snow, the final son of Rhaegar Targaryen. Regardless of whether or not these dragons are truly House Targaryen, Jon is probably still a bastard, and while Aegon could be a Blackfyre, he is at his core a Targaryen, as the Blackfyres were once descended from Targaryens. Tyrion's role in all three of these crucial character stories is pretty consistent. Tyrion's greatest strength seems to be as an advisor. He is at his best in the story in A Clash of Kings. That's really his peak of his self worth and feeling as though he is doing the right thing. When he is acting as Hand of the King in his father's stead, it is his role to guide the rulers of the realm. And that is what he seeks to do in the future. He is going to use that role in the future and recent past of the story to corrupt all three Targaryens, baiting each of them into making what will become their worst mistake. Tyrion, as a villain going forward, isn't going to be doing the evil himself necessarily. He's going to be convincing each of these three Targaryens in turn to take some monstrous action. Aegon falling prey to Tyrion's wicked advice has already happened in the published text. We see it in A Dance with Dragons, where one solitary chess game ends up goading a young prince into attacking a continent pretty much entirely on his own, backed by only one army and not Daenerys and her dragons, as was initially intended. We see in Tyrion's sixth chapter of that aforementioned book that him and young Griff play a game of Cyvasse, or Westerosi chess. During that game, Tyrion convinces young Griff that the right way to win the hand of his aunt is to go to Westeros first and claim it as a conqueror rather than going to her as a beggar. Well, there is something to that, the idea that Daenerys might not find Aegon all that appealing, given the fact that he is going to her basically hat in hand, as Quentyn does, and she doesn't find Quentyn that appealing. So, solid read on Tyrion's part at that point, but creating this rift is ultimately going to be the reason for conflict between Aegon and Daenerys, as Aegon has already landed on Westeros as of the end of A Dance with Dragons. Tyrion's advice to Aegon, which he didn't even intend Aegon to take, he was surprised when he heard that Jon Connington and Aegon went west, will ultimately be disastrous for Westeros. We see that they are already being launched into a war with their landing in the Stormlands in the Griffin Reborn chapter, and hearing in the Winds of Winter sample chapters that Mace Tyrell is riding south to meet Connington and Aegon in battle. And I think it's going to lead to a lot more conflict than needed to happen, as there is also very likely to be a war coming when Daenerys arrives on the continent as well, rather than combining these two claims into one and just having one overwhelming force conquer the continent. Additionally, as it currently seems, the realm is poised to accept Aegon as a very popular ruler, beloved by the masses in a way that Daenerys might not necessarily be. This, combined with him being completely sheltered by Illyrio, whereas Illyrio effectively sold Daenerys and Viserys in order to maybe get an army and made them go through a lot of suffering that ultimately resulted in Viserys' death. I think that will also lead to a larger crack in the relationship between these two Targaryens, eventually culminating in the second Dance of the Dragons. The second Dance of the Dragons is something that Martin loves to reference as happening in the main series. He named one book out of his trilogy, back when Ice and Fire was supposed to only be 3 books, A Dance with Dragons. So the idea of a Targaryen civil war has been seeded back, way back in past the series, specifically in the early 90s, way before I was born. But regardless of that, we see visions as recently as Arion's Winds of Winter sample chapters of dragons dancing, and everywhere they dance, the people died. This is a conflict that is going to be bloody, especially given that at least one side is going to have dragons, and it is pretty much exclusively the fault of Tyrion Lannister. With all of that said, Tyrion's present interactions with Aegon Young Griff Targaryen are at an end, as within that same very chapter containing the Syvas game, Tyrion is kidnapped by Jorah, Where My Hug At Mormont, and brought further east to Meereen, where his path will soon intersect with Queen Daenerys Targaryen. We see in the show that Tyrion becomes her Hand of the Queen and tries to rule Meereen in her stead and doesn't do a great job of it. While that probably won't happen in the books, there are shades of those events that will likely come to pass. Tyrion is arriving at the city in the middle of this massive battle between the slavers' forces and the forces loyal to Daenerys. He actually convinces one sellsword company, the Second Sons, who had defected to the slavers, to go back to Daenerys' side. So it seems as though Tyrion is going to be positioning himself as a fairly prominent player in the city before Daenerys arrives back after her little journey into the Dothraki Sea. A lot of buildup has been devoted to the meeting of these two crucial characters, as Daenerys has been pretty much completely isolated for her entire time in the story. Having someone from the main Westeros story make their way all the way east and finally intersect with her has happened a little bit with Quentyn, but Quentyn is not a major character like Tyrion is. It seems very likely that Tyrion, at some point, whether it be immediately upon meeting, which I don't think is that likely, or later on down the line, will likely end up as Daenerys Targaryen's Hand of the King. And I think it is from that role he is going to end up doing the same to her as he did to young Griff, though perhaps slightly differently. Tyrion is likely to be the match that lights the fire of conflict between Daenerys and young Griff, as not only does Tyrion know that Aegon has gone west, he is the only person in Meereen right now who knows that fact. And what's more, he knows that Illyrio sheltered this boy and seems to want him to become the king rather than want Daenerys to become the queen. Though ideally it seems like Illyrio wants the two of them to work together, but there is some pretty clear favoritism going on there. We see in the show that once this actual campaign for the throne starts, Tyrion becomes woefully incompetent at everything. And I believe this is indicative of his future path, as David and Dan make it clear that they do not want Tyrion to be evil. He is a good person. He's a character that is supposed to sell t-shirts and mugs and have the audience relate to him. So I think that is why he becomes so incompetent in the show. Whereas in the books, I think the opposite is going to happen. I also want to ask, what do you think of Tyrion's role in the future of the story? Let me know in the comments, and while you're down there, leave a like, subscribe. It's free, and it really helps the channel. Sorry to interrupt myself. I'll go back to theorizing. We hear time and time again that Tyrion is the true inheritor of Tywin's legacy, most notably from Tyrion's aunt, Jenna, who tells Jaime that exact same fact, and I think we are going to see that come fully into focus with Daenerys' war for the Iron Throne. I believe Tyrion is going to be the one, not necessarily masterminding the war, but I think he's very much going to take on a Tywin-esque role and end up perpetuating a lot of this war himself. I believe he is going to sail to claim Casterly Rock using his knowledge of the drains and cisterns, since he was made the chief of the sewers by his father on his 18th name day. I think Tyrion is going to be encouraging Daenerys all the while to take more drastic actions to secure her position as the true heir to the Iron Throne. What those actions might entail are unclear. I do not think Daenerys is going to be a mad queen, but I think some of the actions she takes are maybe going to lead to her being far less popular than Aegon, and I think some of those actions are likely going to be spurred by Tyrion Lannister. I do think that Tyrion and Daenerys' relationship will not remain perfect forever. I believe that at some point Tyrion will take some action that goes too far. I think Daenerys at her core is a very good person, whereas Tyrion at his core is a very not good person. And I think we will see some rift there, and I think that is very well established by these rifts forming between Tywin Lannister and Aerys II. The rifts between both of these characters' fathers will likely mirror the rift between them themselves, though it is unclear how that might happen. Again, I don't think Daenerys is going to go mad, and that seems to be a big part of why the rift formed between Tywin and Aerys. But another portion of that was Tywin feeling disrespected. I think maybe there comes a situation where Tyrion is laughed at, and we see him lash out like his father would. The final Targaryen to discuss is Jon Snow. Him and Tyrion have an interesting relationship. We see them meet at the very beginning of the series, and they spend their first several chapters together, journeying north to the Wall. I believe Tyrion's story might end at the Wall as well. That's a video for another day. But I think Jon Snow is going to be taking a much more active role in politics of the North and of the realm as the series progresses, as I think he's going to be the main advocate for this war against the others that will need to be fought in order to secure the future of Westeros. I think Daenerys is going to be a key player in that war as well, and I think Tyrion is going to be crucial in negotiating an alliance between the two, as he is a character who, at that point, will know both of those individuals. That is something I think the show got right, even if all of those initial meetings are super dumb. Okay, I'm going to need you to walk with me here because I don't like what I'm about to say, but I think there are hints that this is what is being set up. We see Tyrion as someone who is convincing these Targaryens to commit massive errors, make massive mistakes. We see it with Aegon invading Westeros. We see it with him probably starting this conflict between Daenerys and Aegon on Daenerys' perspective, and I think he's going to convince Jon Snow of something. And in the show, we see him convince Jon Snow of something. We see Tyrion convince Jon Snow to kill Daenerys Targaryen. But if that happens in the books, I think it will be drastically different in a couple of key ways. First off, I know this sounds left field, and I think it is, and I hope the direction has changed over the past decade or dozen years since A Dance with Dragons came out, or since the drafts I'm about to reference came out, but overall, I think there are a few hints that could be tying in this direction. Most notably, this idea comes from the Cushing Library. For those who don't know, this is a library at a college in Texas where Martin has donated old drafts of his series. In one of those drafts, Reddit user GSteph unearthed versions of old Daenerys chapters back from when A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons were a single book. This was a version of a chapter that we currently have, but there were some details changed. Specifically, in A Dance with Dragons, Daenerys has this dream about her having relations with a guy who seems to have a member made of ice and these bruised lips to some degree. It's unclear what exactly is going on there, but in the drafts, there are a few notable details that seem a bit different. Most notably, that this kind of sensation that Daenerys feels during the stream is described in the draft as not necessarily his member being ice, but her being stabbed with a cold, twisting blade of some kind. And additionally, the person who is stabbing her is described as corpse like in certain attributes. That lends itself to the idea that perhaps a resurrected Jon Snow at some point was supposed to stab Daenerys for some reason. With that said, this is not in the published material, and it is unclear if it will ever end up being Martin's true intention. It just seems like maybe it was the intention at some point. However, if this event does happen in the text, it will be miles different than the television show. First off, Daenerys, I do not think is going to go mad. I think if this happens, it's going to be framed as the massive crime that Jon commits at the end of the story, having been effectively swindled into it by Tyrion. I think that Tyrion is someone who's going to be effectively corrupting these characters as he is a villain throughout the books. I think that Jon being exiled at the end of the story very much makes a ton more sense if Daenerys is not necessarily mad, as in the show it really doesn't make sense that he gets exiled for killing someone that none of the people who exiled him even liked. However, there are a number of other possibilities for what Tyrion could convince Jon to do. The other one off the top of my head would be Tyrion convincing Jon, after Jon learns of his parentage, to make his own bid for the throne, which could lead to yet another Targaryen conflict mirroring that between young Griff and Daenerys. progress. I could see Martin going for a third Dance of the Dragons, but overall, I think both of these are distinct possibilities, or Martin could have changed it further over the years that have passed. Tyrion Lannister's nickname throughout the series is the Imp. The Imp is the devil that sits on your shoulder and whispers malign advice. We see this portrayed in plays in universe in Bravos, and I believe that Tyrion will end up finally embracing this role and becoming the worst version of himself as the story goes on. It's unclear what direction he is going to push all of these characters, but I believe he is now sitting at the asoiaf board ready to move his pieces into the directions that are going to benefit him and drastically hurt both them and the realm. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think of this idea. I have mixed opinions on what I think Tyrion's going to do. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what he is going to convince Jon to do, so let me know in the comments. While you're down there, also subscribe, like, I already said those things. I'll have many more videos on Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, Dunk and Egg for you in the very near future, and I hope you'll join me for all of those. Thank you again for watching, everyone. Goodbye.